Okay, so with that, let's get into it. My name is Devynn Gately. I'm a third-year marine science major at California State University, Monterey Bay. I have some otters in the back here supporting me, so that's awesome. I had the privilege of working with Southwest Fisheries under the supervision of Dr. Elliot Hazen. He couldn't be here today, so I hope I make him proud. So with that, I don't remember. Okay, cool. I wasn't sure I was pointing that. Okay, so offshore wind energy is currently being recognized as one of the most efficient up-and-coming sources of renewable energy. All of these dark blue regions up here in the corner are regions where offshore wind energy is either already implemented or is in the process of being implemented. So why is offshore wind energy so desirable right now? Offshore winds tend to be a lot faster than terrestrial winds, therefore the potential for them to generate more energy is there, and it's making them very valuable, especially in the age of climate change. So the purpose of this study was to analyze habitat suitability predictions within the offshore wind farm lease areas on the West Coast in order to possibly assess risk of ecological disturbance. When my mentor and I were trying to brainstorm for this project, we wanted to make sure the work that we were doing was important, but also original. So when we were researching and reading literature about offshore wind energy and its different ecological effects, we saw a lot about seabirds, and for obvious reasons, those are at risk due to collisions mostly. We saw a lot about marine mammals, noise generation affecting the way they communicate and travel, but we didn't see a whole lot about fish. So that's where we kind of found this gap in the research, and we wanted to take the road less traveled, even if it was going to be a little more challenging. So this is our methods. They were essentially conducted in 3 steps. I began with mapping the average habitat suitability for fresher sharks, mako sharks, blue sharks, and swordfish. So these data layers were added to ArcGIS, and then after that, I added the data layers for the 3 wind farm lease areas, the one in Morro Bay, Diablo Canyon, and Humboldt. After both of the data layers for the species habitat suitability and the wind call areas were added to the map, I was able to assess overlap within these areas. So looking at species density and species activity in these wind call areas to be able to kind of see how they might interact with these structures if they are built. So this was our data set that we were working with. It was absolutely massive because the data was collected every September through January from 1998 through 2016. So we really had to work on subsetting this data and crunching it down to be able to get our results on one map. So this is all 4 species habitat suitabilities mapped together on the West Coast, but in our instance, we were just looking at the 3 wind call sites in Morro Bay, Diablo Canyon, and Humboldt. And then to your right, those are the 3 polygons that represent the offshore wind energy sites. So these are the 2 data sets separate, and then the following slides will show them overlapping so you guys can see what we basically use to assess risk. So this is our Humboldt species collective habitat suitability map, and this is just displaying the species activity across the 4 different fish species. So this is just activity, and the lighter squares show high activity where the darker squares show low activity. And we saw that the 4 fish species collectively mainly congregated on the shelf. This is that same map zoomed in with the polygon added. So as you can see, there's some significant overlap as you get closer to shore and species activity within this wind call lease area. And it should be noted that the wind call area is located only about 35 kilometers offshore. So that is the Humboldt map. This is the Morro Bay species collective map. So just like the Humboldt one, the lighter squares are going to represent the higher activity. And we saw again that these 4 fish species that we were looking at preferred to congregate along the shelf. This is that same map zoomed in with the Diablo Canyon polygon added as well. So there are several interesting things about this site. For one, it has 2 wind call sites in pretty close proximity to one another. And you can also see the overlap because these polygons are slightly transparent. So we did that on purpose so that we could see if any activity was really high in those areas. And we didn't see anything really significant up in Morro Bay. Diablo Canyon had some moderate overlap, but nothing too concerning. The really interesting thing about this map is this red arrow here, it's really small, this little line that it's pointing to, but that's actually a marine protected area, it's a sanctuary. And the Morro Bay offshore wind area really is so small that when we try to measure the distance on arc between where it starts and where the wind area starts, it actually wouldn't even measure it because the distance between the two was so small. So that was something that when I first presented this work, people were really interested in because NOAA is huge on maintaining our MPAs. And again, for distances, for reference, the Diablo Canyon site is 45.4 kilometers offshore, and the Morro Bay site is 51.6 kilometers offshore. So these were kind of how we assessed these different results based on the overlap that we saw. Morro Bay was pretty much low risk when it came to activity overlapping within the wind call area site. However, like I said, it's extremely close to an MPA border, which would raise concerns for not only fisheries, but also the maintaining the MPAs. Diablo Canyon, it showed some moderate risks, some moderate overlap, but nothing too concerning, especially because we don't entirely know how exactly these offshore wind farms are going to impact the species that we're looking at. This is just looking at the migratory patterns and seeing how that they might run into each other. And then Humboldt County showed higher risk. Humboldt County showed higher risk on the map. There was more overlap with activity just from raw numbers. So what was our solution? Today we talked in our discussion a lot about how to work around this problem where we're trying to improve our planet by producing renewable energy, but we also don't want to affect any ecosystems unnecessarily. So certain solutions for this would be using these structures to possibly create artificial reefs to boost ecosystem productivity. And I really liked this quote up here. Economy without ecology means managing the human-nature relationships without knowing the delicate balance between humankind and the natural world. So I think there's a lot to be done with this work when it comes to offshore wind. It's a huge question and huge issue that I think a lot of scientists are trying to get to the bottom to. My work was just a little stepping stone, but nonetheless super important, and it's a start. So with that being said, acknowledgements. I would obviously like to thank my mentors, Dr. Elliot Hazen, Stephen Bograd, Stephanie Brody, and Heather Welch. On behalf of the EPP program, I would love to thank my colleagues, my mentors, and I thank you for having me here today. It's been such a blessing to be a part of this. So.
Do you have any questions for Devynn? We have time for a couple.
Yeah. Have you had the opportunity to read on lessons learned from this type of farms in Europe, for example?
Yeah, so a lot of my work was the beginning stages of this project were all reading. And there are some things that we need to look out for, especially apart from, like I said, mammals and seabirds were a reoccurring theme, but more recently I read some literature talking about how turbines can actually generate additional surface disruption, so surface water disruption, which is a huge talking point that my group in discussion held today, because that has the potential to disrupt the distribution of phytoplankton, which at a larger scale has the potential to change the movement of highly migratory species. So that's huge for fisheries.
Was there any other research besides looking at just how it affects like marine animals that went into like maybe the placements of the sites, maybe like as we spoke about earlier today, like some of the National Weather Service implications and just about where the sites would be located besides just the mammals?
I'm not entirely knowledgeable at that. These were proposed wind sites, so they weren't actually set in stone. My work was to kind of, they gave me the locations and they were like, would this work given the species activity in this area? So that was kind of my job. So I'm not entirely sure about that, but that's a really great question.
Okay. One more?
Sorry. So in terms of like the amount of energy the wind farms can produce, you said it's more efficient than the other ones. Like how solar power, would it be cost effective to put more of these rather than other renewable alternative energy sources?
That's a really good question. You know, I don't know. It's still a very like new technology. One thing we did explore when I was doing this project was the fact that all of the energy has to be transferred to shore, obviously, via cables. And for every X amount of nautical miles that energy has to transfer, it loses an amount of energy. So does that compensate for, you know, the efficiency, or are we losing more energy? That's still a question that needs to be answered. And like I think we all learned from discussion today, there's this problem it's so double-sided. There's so many things we have to look into. And so it's important that work like this is happening and young minds like all of us are coming up with solutions to this problem.
Let's squeeze one in. There's a lot of interest. One last question.
Hi.
Hi.
Great presentation. I just had a question about your rationale in choosing the species. What did you use, or what information did you gather that led you to choose the species that you did for your analysis?
Yeah, thank you. So before I started this project, Elliot and I also met with one of my previous mentors, Dr. Amber Rhodes, and we kind of said, what are some species that we could prioritize? What's a hot topic right now in fisheries management? And she actually came to us. She's manager for East Coast fisheries. I've known her forever, and she was like, right now, this is what we're focusing on. And like we said, we wanted to take the road less traveled. We didn't want to do what everyone else was doing because there's plenty of information on mammals and seabirds. We wanted to provide something new and something different. So when she gave us a list, and there were probably 45 data sets, and we just picked a couple of species out of them. So there's so many that need to be prioritized. During my summer internship, I only had the time to do those, but we basically based it off of what policymakers are interested in right now by meeting with them and talking to them.
Great, thank you.